morning. Back in the 1980s, mid-80s, I was early 20s, I began work at St Vincent's Hospital in the Department of Immunology in Sydney. A research assistant looking into atopic disease, allergies and that sort of thing. It was at the height, well not the height, it was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and my boss had come back from Boston and gotten onto the ground of research and techniques in diagnosing AIDS and brought that into our department. I shared the lab with a fellow who was doing the work on AIDS at that stage, but it soon increased and grew, and the team around it was much bigger, and our whole department was really swallowed up by AIDS, which was where all the funding and all the intensity was with this growing epidemic. What I experienced was this new thing that was happening, a fear in society about AIDS and what it meant. There was judgment. As a young evangelical Christian, I heard a lot of different things, and a lot of it was about judgment, God's judgment on particular people. And that's what AIDS was about. But in work, I saw the care and compassion of these medicos and researchers, and the stories of people, human beings who are struggling with this illness. As the illness progressed, or the epidemic progressed, there was a section of the hospital which was quarantined, basically, cut off from everything else, isolated. You weren't allowed down there without gowns and gloves and masks and everything covered up. It was a part of the hospital no one went to. Few staff went into there, and the people who were in there sick were kind of forgotten and left. That's not totally true, but effectively that's what it was. We were pushing those people into that place, and few had anything to do with them. There was a situation I remember when a piece of our equipment failed and needed servicing, and we were looking around for a technician to come and service this, but because it was used for diagnosis and other issues around AIDS patients, no one would come. Finally, there was one fellow who, for a company, said, "I'll come." He was a gay man, and found out later he was a Christian. And he couldn't do enough to help. He did a wonderful job, but also he and his church community came and cared for many of the patients in the hospital, sitting with them. If it wasn't for them and friends and family and people of their community who would come and feed them, who would help change their clothes and their beds and bathe them, hold their hands, these people would have been lost and isolated, alone. It was a very difficult space for them, and our society didn't deal with it very well. They were judged and excluded and isolated and pushed to the margins, as have so many people in history been. We're aware of something of this, a little of this in COVID-19, where we've been isolated, effectively locked away in our homes for some months, allowed out for a bit of exercise and essential shopping, mainly it, where we didn't really meet with people for weeks, months on end. For the last year we've been fairly isolated in many ways. It's changed a little bit of recent times, but different lockdowns have pushed us back into our homes. We don't touch people. We stay our physical distance. 1.5 metres is a much further distance than I realised. The shaking of hands and the hugging, kissing, the things that are a normal part of greeting one another are taboo. I mean, they still happen, but not as much. We wash or sanitise our hands, we wear masks, we do a whole lot of things that highlight to us what isolation and exclusion can be like, and how the fear in this pandemic has taken over many people's lives, particularly in other parts of the world. This week in Mark's story of Jesus, it continues from last week's one, where Jesus was in a synagogue and healed a man who was out of his right mind, filled with an unclean spirit, and restored, brought into his right mind, his right being. Immediately after this, Mark says, Jesus went to the home of Simon Peter. And there he found Simon Peter's mother-in-law sick in bed with a fever. Now, she was the matriarch of the family, the one responsible to oversee hospitality and greeting of visitors, food and preparation and so on. She was unable to fulfill her role in the social fabric of her world, within the family and society and community. She was not able to do what she should do because of illness. And Jesus went into her and he took her hand. A phrase that means very little to us. It's a lovely thing to do. But in the time was taboo. A man who is unrelated to a woman should never touch her, take her hand. It's taboo. Jesus also, doing this on the Sabbath day, he'd healed a man in the synagogue on the Sabbath. He's healing her on the Sabbath. That's taboo, against the law. It's work and you shouldn't do it. Jesus, it seems, doesn't care too much about social norms and conventions and taboos when it comes to people and their needs. And in his life, his words and his actions, the reign of God is proclaimed. And we see that this reign of God doesn't care too much for societal norms or taboos. The exclusion and stuff that society projects onto people. The isolation, the rules, the culture. Because it embraces all people into this reign of love, which is transformative and liberating and brings life. And that's what Jesus is doing. He heals this woman and pulls her to her feet. She goes then and fulfills the function. So it's not just the restoration of physical being, but social being. And in these anthropological kinds of studies, it seems that illness and disease are separate terms. Disease is about the biomedical conditions that affect our body, treated with therapies and medicines in our world, doctors and so therapists. But then there's illness. Illness involves the physical, emotional, physical elements of a disease, but also the social implications. And it's often those social implications that are a real dimension where healing takes place. Restoring people not just in their right mind or body, but into the social fabric of their society. Allowing them to fulfill their function as a human being within this community. To do what they're called and created to be and do. To allow them to engage in life as part of a community. That they belong and they are loved and accepted. And that's what was happening in those wards in St Vincent's Hospital when people walked in and overcame the fear and the taboos and the norms of society which said, push these people with AIDS to the side, it's their problem, their fault, whatever, let them go, it's a judgment upon them. They went into those places, they held hands, they fed, they bathed, they changed, they cleaned, and they embraced. They provided respect and dignity, and they embraced these people into life, into community. And later, as that epidemic progressed and there were hospices, there were people who would sit with the dying and hold their hands. Much like Mother Teresa and her sisters sat with the dying in Calcutta and held their hands and held them in the death, offering dignity and respect and love, life, acceptance. This is what Jesus offers. This is what Jesus is about. After sunset, after the Sabbath day, many others came for healing and outcast of demons and so on. And Jesus supported them and helped them. And early in the morning, though, he got up and went into the hills and prayed. And it was in his praying that he's renewed in his being, his meditation, contemplation, reflection. He's not just restored in his own being, but helped to see what his mission and his calling is. And when the disciples come and say, look, there's a great crowd of people outside the house wanting you to heal their sick, he says, I've come to proclaim God's grace and love in other parts of the world. I've got to go to other villages, other towns, and proclaim. Because God's reign is not just about the curing of disease. It's about the healing of society. It's about bringing people together in relationship overcoming the taboos and the fears and the norms and the culture that excludes and marginalises people, and restores communities into wholeness, where people can belong, where they can share their gifts, their love, their being, where we can all live together as God intended it to be. This is a wonderful story and a wonderful challenge to us. In this time of COVID-19, how might we reach out to people in ways that include and bring healing and restoration? How might we, in the various situations of our lives, offer that forgiveness and love, compassion and liberation that Jesus does, to restore relationship, to restore being, to bring respect and dignity and life to all people? That's our challenge and our invitation. We come and join the journey with Jesus.